Welcome to Industrial Voices, the podcast where leaders in manufacturing, e-commerce, and logistics share stories and insights on the trends shaping their industries. I'm Bradley Dunn, a commercial real estate broker specializing in industrial real estate across the Southeast. Let's get after it.
Welcome to Industrial Voices, and for another episode, going to introduce our guest really quickly. I'm thrilled to have him on. This is Jon Morris. So Jon Morris joined Beacon Partners in 1995, and over the past 3 decades has held roles in leasing, acquisitions, development, and asset management before becoming a senior partner. A graduate of Davidson College, Jon has been instrumental in guiding Beacon's growth into one of the leading full-service real estate firms in the Carolinas. In addition to his professional leadership, Jon is deeply engaged in the Charlotte community. He serves on the board of KIPP North Carolina, is a trustee and capital campaign co-chair at the John Crossland School, and previously chaired the board of the Dowd YMCA. He's also on the executive board of Carolina Thread Trail Catawba Land Conservancy and spent more than 6 years on Charlotte's Unified Development Ordinance Advisory Committee. And I have no idea when he sleeps. But so I guess to kick us off here, so tell us a little bit about your background and where you're from and then how you got to Beacon.
Yeah, I'll try to be brief here. So I grew up in Charlotte. I'm a K through 12 Charlotte-Mecklenburg school kid, so bounced around from Raymond Road to Marie G. Davis to Myers Park Traditional, which was a new sort of magnet concept, and graduated from Myers Park High School. Had a great education, and we'll talk a little bit about charity and philanthropy. It just instilled in me that your destiny should not be determined by your zip code and what public school you're assigned to, and education is really the stepping stone. You know, it's the key to the rest of life. Just exploring it, being curious about it, opportunities. So Myers Park gave me the great opportunity to go to Davidson College, which was super formative. And one of the things they do is instill, I don't know if it's an obligation or a duty, but college is a place where you hopefully find out a little bit about who you are, maybe what your talent is, what that thing you can do is. And then one of the things they layer on again and again is we then have that duty, that obligation to give it away the rest of our lives. One of my favorite quotes is a Picasso quote, and I'll probably get it backwards. What life's all about is finding your purpose. Giving it away is what gives life meaning. And I think Davidson helped me find that purpose, and we'll talk about giving it away.
Yeah, I love it. What was your major at Davidson?
German and economics. Okay. I was in economics, and I was so bad at math that I had to off ramp and went through the Center for Special Studies. And I lived a year in Germany. It was one of the coolest things that happened at Davidson. Just an amazing experience. Learned different words mean different things in different languages and culture. Came back to school. Really wanted to be an international business, which is whatever the heck that means. It's like when people say they want to be a developer.
Fancy. Yeah.
Like, what does that mean? We can talk a little bit about that as well. Graduated, tried to be an international business person. Charlotte's a great place for German business. I think at the time there were like 110 companies, probably closer to 200. Now I sent a resume to all 110 of those companies, got 0 callbacks. I think I got 80 or 85 wall of shame letters saying that we aren't interested in somebody that has a liberal arts education and can't account or lawyer or actually do anything. So worked for my dad for a little bit, and then just like, hey, this isn't going well. Took 100 days with a buddy of mine, and we just traveled around the United States.
Did you take an RV? Did you hike, backpack?
We had this shitty geoprism, which Ann Johnson and others have made fun of for the first few years of my career while I kept it. It was this teal green geoprism. My friends threatened to get me a customized license plate that said Porta-John. It was that color. But we just camped out of the back of that for 2/3 of the trip. And came back and had a few opportunities in real estate with the Adkins Group. I talked to Henry and David over there. I talked to Will and Pete and Ed at Beacon, a couple other places, maybe accounting spot, a banking spot. And thank goodness, I was clueless about it, but picked, I felt there was an opportunity. I had always worked. And one of the things in working as a kid is I had learned that I didn't want to work an hour to make $1 or $10 or $1,000. I wanted to be paid based upon my mind and my productivity and what I was able to generate. And I thought real estate gave me the best option to do that. And a lot of that is just my mom and my dad instilling, values of entrepreneurialism and hard work. But was fortunate to, after I think 15 interviews, land a job with Beacon in January of 1995. and been at
love
the
it.
same place ever since.
I'm
Wild.
jealous for a lot of reasons, but I did not take any of those gap years or gap days, not even a day, right? I think I took off my lacrosse pads at UNC and put on a suit and walked right into the office. And so I'm curious, what was your favorite national park or place that you visited in those 100 days?
Oh man, they were amazing. I mean, you got to say Yellowstone. It was amazing. Glacier. My grandfather was in the National Forestry Service after he got out of the military. He was a World War II veteran, and he loved Bryce Canyon in Utah, so that was a special place.
That's the one with the arches, right?
No, that's
no?
Arches Canyon
Okay, well,
or Canyonlands. Bryce has the hoodoos.
Okay.
The little things look like when you go to North Carolina Beach and you make the little, with the sand, you make the little things. Yeah. They look like that. And I'd always done that as a kid, going to Sunset Beach. And anyway, it was amazing.
That's incredible.
That's probably my favorite.
Yeah, wish I had done something like that. Okay, so you landed at Beacon in the mid-'90s, and then what was your role initially? And kind of where did you start out?
I thought I was coming on to be a leasing agent. It's funny. I tell that story to Pete Lash or Will, and they're like, we were sort of bringing you on as a property manager. But there were 5 of us. And so you got to do everything. So when you went through that list of things I've done, I mean, the reason I did most of those is because there was nobody else to do them. So it was a great seat to learn real estate from. I had no idea how fortunate I was at the time, but yeah, it was cool. It was a cool upbringing.
And then you've come quite a long ways since then. What is it that you do today now for Beacon?
So today the role has changed. It was a Business Journal article about how we transitioned. Pete and Ed and Mike and John sold the company to Pete Kidwell and Walker Gorham and Tim Robertson, and that transition I think it was really cool to me. That we were able to groom that type of and attract that type of talent to Beacon that could take over the company. So now it's shifted from more of that general partner, sponsor day-to-day grind role into more of an advisory role, and we're still trying to work out what that is going to be. But I hope that they don't push me away, and I can maybe just step aside so that they can grow and do the things they're going to do. But yeah.
Wonderful. So it's not quite a president emeritus, right? Like you're still actively involved day to day.
I really enjoy it, and hope there's the opportunity to work there a long time. Ed's dad, Mr. Wisiger, would pop in the office at Carolina Tractor from time to time. He'd even come over to Beacon to time and ask us about real estate investments and how we're thinking about things. And that was in his 60s and 70s. So. I think time will tell, but I hope to be involved with Beacon for decades.
Wonderful. Okay, well, let's talk about what is Beacon, right? So we've got people that listen to this podcast that sit in Charlotte and are in real estate and are heavily familiar. We've also got truck drivers and people that run manufacturing organizations. And so let's just talk about at a very high level what is Beacon. So I guess give us kind of your about page.
I think on the highest level, Beacon is an investment company as differentiated for a fee for services company. So we want to create value for the community, for our people, for our investors, on the debt and equity side, individually. And the mantra is to sort of create that through real estate ownership over time. And that's one of the things that's been very interesting about Beacon is that, sort of post-Great Financial Crisis, we got through that. And our big lesson, not to skip forward in the questions, but our big lesson there is we really want to own real estate that we don't mind holding and investing in vacant in a bad market, because it was terrible in 2008, 9, and 10. There were just no deals really until early 10, and it were smaller deals. And so to stare at some assets that you didn't want to own was intimidating. So to do that, and then in a collaborative fashion internally with our investors and bankers, with all of our vendors, with our customers, and to hold ourselves accountable to building something that has a greater purpose. And Pete Lash, our CEO, described it one time. He's like, because this was in a company meeting in 2016, we sort of came up with that. We want to be collaborative, we want to be accountable, and we want to be purposeful. And everybody's like, well, what is that purpose? And he goes, I don't know. We haven't found it yet. But
we're going to figure it out.
But we're going to figure it out together, because that purpose could be internal, meaning, dads spend more time with their daughters, or you work with your elderly parents. And those things are important, and take time, just as investing in great organizations like, the YMCA and KIPP schools and, Carolina Thread Trail, Catawba Lands Conservancy. So what does it mean to have a purpose? And I think that purpose, the company can certainly have a waypoint, but that purpose extends to individuals as well. And how do we collectively, collaboratively sort of meld that into our North Star?
I love that explanation. For real estate executives that I've met with that are extremely successful over time, they give a similar cadence of an answer where it's 5% about real estate and then 95% about the people that work with them and how they operate. But I guess quick stats as well, and I pulled these from online. You correct me if they're wrong, but you guys have owned or managed 17.5 million square feet. You've developed 33.8 million square feet, and you've invested over 2.8 billion throughout the life cycle of your company. Any of those stats wrong?
Those are pulled from the website.
Okay, so wonderful.
I'm going to assume they're correct. And yes,
they're at least okay. They're up to date. Well, those are staggering figures, especially because those would be staggering figures if you guys had invested nationally, right? It's all the more impressive that a lot of that money has gone down in South Carolina and North Carolina. So that gives you kind of an idea and a scale and a scope of what Beacon is. And then I guess just rapid fire some of your hallmark clients, buildings, product types, the things that you guys have done. Just to give an idea to some of the people listening what it is that you guys actually do.
Yeah. So I know we're not here to talk about our office business, but one of the hallmark clients and projects was Rail Yard. We were blessed to lease half of that building to Allstate. I think that was back in 2016 or 17, maybe 18, 17, 18. And I mean, that's just a seminal project. The three larger projects we did, but back in the day, there was Long Creek that we developed in the 90s. But the next big project we did was up in Concord, River Oaks. And, that was a big project. We can talk a little bit about that later. But we moved from there and, sort of took the profits on that, moved into Metrolina and bonded distribution, leased a building there. FedEx leased a building there. We built that building. It was a great learning process. We're fortunate to sell that. It was an odd flip, but we sold that in late 2020 to Clarion and took those proceeds down to Carolina Logistics Park. So it's just sort of a little bit of keeping your chips on red, and we're blessed by a very fortunate market, over the course of 15 years up and to the right, generally, and a steep up and to the right in 20 and 21, going into 22. Our seminal industrial deal has to be the Amazon project, and working with those folks and FedEx concurrently. It's just, they're two of the best
right
out there.
And the Amazon project's 1.2 million square feet.
1 million square feet in total, just a hair over 1 million square feet in one building. And it's just, the largest building I think we had built before that was 525,000 square feet. So it was a big project with a group that runs fast. And between that project and the FedEx project, and then fortunately in Raleigh, we were able to work with UPS. And it's being able to see how companies like that do real estate, but especially Amazon, just how innovative and fast-paced they are. Our draw schedule, the way we look at a project, the spreadsheet would change from month to month because they're making innovations, and sometimes that's a little harrowing. But the real estate education was quite remarkable. Well,
the air gets really thin when you talk about people that have done massive build-to-suits for Amazon, FedEx, UPS. So it's some rare air. All right, let's keep moving on. So that's what Beacon is, right? And then let's talk about what a real estate investment company and platform actually is. So I've got a couple of quick hit 101 questions here. What is the difference between development and acquisitions?
So development is a long process. It takes time. You have entitlement risk. You have timing risk. What's going to happen in 3 years? Who knows what's going to happen in 3 years, especially multi-phase projects. And it takes a huge team to do the entitlements, to do the construction, to manage it, to dispose of it, to lease it. It's a long process, whereas acquisitions are more cash flow certain. They're quicker. They happen generally in 45 to 90 days. And generally you got a tenant in there. Land's worked really well over the last 15 years, developing land, just because the market's been up to and to the right. So candidly, I think maybe that market's a little mispriced. We're seeing some really high land prices. Y'all are participating, in those bids and those marketing processes. But but yeah, just development takes a lot of time.
And so I guess also summarizing, so development takes more time, there's more risk. The rewards can be greater though, correct? And then acquisitions.
They should be greater.
They should
be
greater.
The risk-adjusted reward should be greater because I do think there's a lot more risk there.
Certainly. Okay. And then what is the difference between construction management and development? And I think this is for all the college kids out there saying they want to be developers, right?
Yeah, so I always talk in terms of a symphony here. The developer is more of a conductor of the symphony. You know, you're wildly waving your arms at everybody. You're not making any music. But you probably know how to play the violin and the French horn and maybe the kettle drum. And it's a more holistic look at that whole process I described. The land acquisition, entitlement, financing, construction, the lease up, the refi, dispo, you know, the whole life cycle of a 2, 3, 5, 10-year project. The construction manager is a key part. You know, think of like a first chair violinist in the symphony, like Yitzhak Perlman, you know, who's the guy behind Schindler's List. He did all that violin playing there, which I love that movie. But they're a specialist in one part of the development process, and they probably dip in, depending on their skill set, dip into the entitlements and definitely, you know, dip into the bidding of the project and the management of the construction at the owner architect construction meeting. So being a developer is something that I think happens after several, you know, maybe double-digit years in the business where maybe you come in from the finance analyst side or the leasing side or the construction side, and you are just curious about the other aspects of it, and somehow you get exposure. That's why my seat was so great, is I got exposure to all aspects of it because, you know, there were so few people. But yeah, that's the difference.
Well, and here's another way that I've broken it down. So that's dead on, and you can tell me as a person with far more experience than me if what I'm saying is accurate or incorrect. But I've always said that the difference between a developer and a construction manager is that the developer understands demand, and so and potentially the construction manager would understand the demand as well. But a developer needs to understand demand from capital, demand from the downstream buyer of their buildings, demand from tenants, and be able to take all of that demand and turn it into a project.
The front side demand of what type of space do we need to build and who's most likely to lease it, correct, and the backside demand of, you know, how do we access capital, debt and equity, how do we sell it, so what's the investment sale capital markets look like, or refinance it, which is a different type of debt and equity. So yes, it's you're looking at all parts of the process, the entire continuum as a developer, the construction manager, which is a great way to learn the business, is looking at, you know, a smaller view of that continuum. But a great way to bifurcate it is the demand side.
Yeah. Well, thank you. That makes me feel good. I've said that for a lot of years, and I've never had anyone actually tell me if it's correct or not.
That way, I think that's very accurate and succinct.
Wonderful. Okay, so and then where does the money come from that's being invested into these projects?
I mean, a bunch of different places. You know, on the equity side, it can be the institutional equity. You know, family offices, which are sort of a middle market, and then high net worth investors. We've tended to access our debt from more of that high net worth investor, maybe dipping into the family office, as has Trinity. Y'all have done a great job of also doing a lot of work, you know, in the institutional side. And then, you know, same thing on the debt side is, you know, we work a lot with the banks and had done that. It was candidly a mistake that we reckoned with in 2006, 7, and 8, is we had a lot of bank debt, and probably in retrospect and definitely today, you know, want to have a more balanced bank debt where there's maybe personal guarantees and recourse, and shorter term with long-term debt, whether that's supplied by private markets or public markets, or in the case of a REIT, or the institutional markets. But yes, I don't know if that hits your question.
I think it does. So it's said another way, a lot of places and a lot of money that wants to get into real estate from a lot of different for a lot of different reasons,
which is why mortgage bankers and the people who are experts on that capital market side, the equity, the debt, the investment sale, we lean heavily on those partners.
Okay, so now this next part, what is leasing and what makes an effective landlord leasing broker in your opinion? And actually I'll qualify this ahead of time. Prior to me getting into real estate, whenever I saw a building and it said Bank of America across the top, I just assumed Bank of America owned that building and occupied every floor of that building. And that
so did I. Yep.
Could not be further from the truth, right? So what is leasing and what makes an effective landlord leasing broker in your opinion?
I mean, leasing is selling the tenants on picking your building versus the competition. And back to your earlier point on understanding the market is number one. And You can understand it from an analytical point of view, looking at CoStar, putting together your own proprietary market reports, and we lean heavily on the CoStars and the brokerages for those reports. You guys put together a great one at Trinity. Relationships with brokers is number two. Tenant rep brokers are elbows out trying to box out the competition. See, Trinity and CB and Cushman and JLL often will go to the same pitch trying to get the same either local or national tenant. We don't want to do that as Beacon. We want those folks to be our allies. And one hard part about this business is one day you and I are on the couch together talking about a podcast, and friendly the next day, we might be competing for a land deal with one of your clients, or courting you to bring us that land deal. It's a complicated business, but a good landlord leasing agent has great relationships with the other brokers in the market because you're going to see them through your building all of the time. And then relationships with tenants, which maybe should be the most important thing, but it's not often that you're going to bring a tenant to your building, especially at Beacon. We're out there cold calling the market like everybody else is, mostly to understand the buildings and our competitors, what they're doing well, what they're not doing well. It's, I think, maybe less than two handfuls of times over my 30 years have we cold called a tenant and brought them to our building. It's just a hard thing to do. But yes, understanding the relationships with tenants, because at the end of the day, they're the customer. And the more you can talk with the customer, and they're the end customer, I'd say our main customer is our broker relationships, those allies.
All right. We've already talked about this a little bit, but how important is debt and the corresponding interest rate in your world?
I'll talk a little bit about interest rates. They're the cost of capital. So if interest rates go up, the price of capital goes up. So your debt becomes more expensive. And consequently, if your debt's going to get more expensive, your equity's going to be more expensive. And we've learned that over the last 3 or 4 years with this zero interest rate environment, really from 2009, 10 to 22, the cost of capital was zero. So you could go out and do, amazing things with debt. We were getting, mid twos on interest rates for long-term money, which is incredible. And our competitors on the institutional side were doing it for cheaper, 50 basis point spreads and, with the truly institutional folks. So now the cost of money has increased with interest rates. And so it's getting harder to finance deals on the debt side and the equity side. So, higher prices for capital make it more challenging for tenants to release new space. And we're starting to hear that with our tenants. Lease rates have gone from $4 to $8 or even $10, $12 a square foot. And let's say you own a 20,000 square foot building and we go to you and say, hey, the market, I know you're paying $5, but the market's 10. And you're like, okay, that's another $100,000 on my P&L that maybe I should have been expecting, but is a surprise. I'm out in the market 6 or 12 months early, and wow, over the last 3 times I did this, it would go up 0 to 5%. In the late 90s, your lease rate would go backwards. From $350, it had escalated to $4 over the course of 5 years, and then it would go back to $350 a foot. As a business owner, if it's a smaller business, they look at that and they're like, wow, I'm only making $200,000 a year on my business, and I now have to pay my landlord $100,000 more. It's not worth it, the risk of running this business. And we've seen that at several different times where the owner of that business has ultimately either closed it down a handful of times or gone out and bought a building, which we'll get to. Users buying buildings is a interesting result of sort of higher lease rates, which is certainly demand driven, but it costs more to build these projects because land is more, construction is more, the cost of capital is more. All parts of the pro forma have gotten more expensive.
All right. And then the next one, how much of a role does city government play in your day-to-day?
Oh my gosh. It's crucial. It can help you to build a moat. Like it's really hard to do business in Raleigh and entitle land in Raleigh because you have, I think, 14 different municipalities. Charlotte, we have 6, but the city dominates it. The city and the county, dominate the permitting process. So even if it's sometimes frustrating, it's relatively homogenous across a broad geography. And usually when you go to outlying towns, it gets a little easier. So it's super important to have relationships with council people on rezonings to understand the permitting department. And to tell you how important it is to me, from 2006 to 2008, for 3 years, I was on the post-construction controls ordinance and spent hours a week talking about stormwater, which was educational, but I did it to get to know people. I spent 5.5 years as chair of the code enforcement which is the building standards department. They do the vertical development. They're the county. And getting to know those folks, and then another 6 years on the UDO, which was more city focused. So, I try to invest my time where I think it's well used. Part of that is civic service. We just were able to, Erin Shaw in our office just joined the planning.
She's great.
Planning department. I'm not saying that right. She's on the planning commission. And when I told her, I'm like, geez, do you want to do this? It's a big commitment. Her first response was, yes, this is a great way for me to give back to my city. So some of it is giving back to the community that did so much for you, because they need our input as private developers. And oftentimes, if you get to know them, they'll listen to you a little bit better. NAIOP has a great saying: if you're not at the table, in governmental affairs, whether it's lobbying or creating these ordinances, then you're on the menu. And understanding those things is really important, and that's why I've invested a lot of time. And I would encourage people. Now, it's got to be an interest, a sincere interest, because if you don't do things you're interested in, that's miserable. But if you have an interest in that, find a way to get involved through REBIC, through CRCBR, NAIOP. There's a bunch of different conduits.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you for all your service. Goodness. Okay, so we have a section here, History of Beacon. We're running a little behind, so I think we've touched on quite a bit of this. But in the early days, give us one of the we were scrappy type of stories back from kind of the early days of Beacon.
So Pete Lash, even though he could run a spreadsheet back in the day, he would cold call every tenant and every park that we competed with. So he was mainly on the north side of Charlotte, and he would put all of the information about those tenants and those buildings on these 3x5 note cards. And they were very well organized. They were in one of those little things that your parents probably have, from the 1980s. But he would write in pencil on all of those, and it would have the building owner, the building depth, the size of the building, who had the debt on it, and who all the tenants were, and their square footage and their lease terms. So we converted all that into a spreadsheet. But he just went bay by bay, tenant by tenant, park by park, and that resulted. I say handful of deals directly, but that resulted in him pulling Scholastic book fairs out of Huntersville Business Park. So up at Exit 23. This is back in 1991 or 92, and this company called Classic Graphics, which was over on North Davidson on the northern end, where a lot of those buildings are that are still sort of run down. They were in one of those buildings. So Pete was cold calling probably the nicest park in North Mecklenburg County, and one of the nastiest parks north of Uptown back in the day, when that was not a cool place to be, especially that part. And that's what started our first spec building. And without those two leases, we don't do 5901 Northwoods, and just the granularity that he went at that with. And prior to that, he was in the Army. He had no real estate experience. That to me is scrappy. And I use, that's the same playbook we use. That's the same playbook Alex Habecker uses. And that's the same playbook that Pete Lash uses, and everybody in between that's on the deal side.
I always tell my team, the worst part about cold calling is that it absolutely works.
It ain't fun though. Yeah. You're getting told, 19 times out of 20 that, get out of here. Sometimes at gunpoint.
Yeah. Okay. And then we've talked through kind of where you guys are today. So we'll skip ahead to what I think makes Beacon really special. And I've said this to you and your teammates in the past, but to a person, you guys are just really good people, and it seems that every time I look around, you guys are doing the right thing, or you're building another project that the whole city can be proud of. And so, I guess, talk me through kind of how that got into your DNA and what has you all wired like that.
One of the things we were proudest of back in 2016, when we first started thinking about what's the next phase for Beacon, and Pete Lash is the strategic leader on this. We did a sort of 360 on our company and talked to brokers and bankers and investors and tenants. And the thing that they said is, hey, you guys don't always get it right, but when you don't, you do the right thing. And it was almost like they had collaborated with that phrase, you do the right thing. And the reason we do the right thing is because we collaborate with each other. I get really mad sometimes, and it's something I've worked on my whole career, hopefully gotten better at it. But to sit down with the people in your office and say, hey, this entity person did me wrong, and here's why, and get that out, because it's there, it's real. And then say, well, what's the right way to go back to them, and have 3 people in that conversation. And if we all agree, then we bring a fourth person in. Like, what's the other point of view? And to think about hard come back, because this is a tough business. Sometimes the right thing is not immediately evident, and you can go off course degree by degree. Fortunately, in Charlotte, we didn't have a lot of folks that have done that, but it happens. And, we want to continue to do the right thing, and it gets back to that process of collaboration, accountability, and purpose.
Well, and it's interesting that you say, like, when things do go wrong, that you make it right? So Andy Stanley has a podcast, leadership podcast, and he talked to Horst Schulze, the guy who essentially made the Ritz-Carlton what it is today. And Horst Schulze says that people want three things out of a product. They want the person who gives it to them to be nice. They want the product to be defect-free. And then when something goes wrong with the product, they want that nice person to fix it. Mm-hmm. And I think that, like, the longer I'm in business, the more true that gets. And I feel like you guys do an exceptional job of all three of those.
It's intentional, and again, we don't always get it right. And there's probably people out there that would say you get it wrong, and because nobody's perfect. It's about excellence, and we're intentional about trying to be doing our best to be excellent.
Appreciate you guys are on the right track if you're not there already, right?
It's a journey.
Okay, and then so I wanted to highlight your personal service. I've talked through the boards and the things that you've been involved in, but what inspired you? So outside of the city government type of things, but what inspired you to be that involved in the city? Is this something that your parents instilled in you? Like, where did this come from, and how did you wind up this involved?
Certainly the first 18 years of your life you're going to be formed by your parents. So I think the DNA is there and the foundation is there. Davidson definitely built it. That just commitment, continuing commitment to find this, whatever your talent is, and then give it back to the world. And there's a duty and an obligation. Pete Lash, 100%. I think the military, has a similar view on obligation and service. The folks that serve our country are just amazing human beings. I've been fortunate, blessed to have great mentors, great teachers. And then when you get asked, try to say yes. Because sometimes you're like, and you need borders. Like, I try not to be involved in more than 2 nonprofits, because then I think maybe my name's just on there because, I want the recognition. But and to be involved in projects where you're either going to give your time and your treasure, or ideally you have a talent, like a professional expertise that you can lend to that organization. But try to find reasons to say yes within those principles and those parameters. And I've been really lucky to say yes.
Going to go a little bit off script here, but one thing that shined through just in the notes and the things that we talked about prior to this is just the fact that, like, you very clearly have a faith in God. And
Correct.
And I'm curious where that has come from over the years, kind of what your testimony is, like where does your faith come from, and where did that, I guess, originate?
I love that question. It's not something I present with. I think maybe I should more. But parents went to church when I was a kid. It wasn't a huge thing in our life. They believed that the relationship with God is very personal, and sort of rebelled against some of the societal and religious parts about God, but we're always very spiritual. Young Life was huge for me in high school. I love Young Life. You're getting there, sitting there singing "Blowing in the Wind" and going to Roaring Gap in Colorado. It's really cool. I stepped away for a while, a little just frustrated taking that journey, and then really Davis Kirkendall at Search Ministries got me back. And when we had kids, we went to church and did those things. But Search Ministry and the studies that were, and now former colleague at Beacon, Scott Dumler, is head of that group, and it's as like a board person. And he invited me into a Bible study. I'd been in one for 10 years that Davis Kirkendall and I started with just a great group of friends, and it ebbs and it flows. 10 years is a long time to be in. When Davis said the half-life is sort of 3 before just life and everything else. But being back in that Bible study showed me how much I missed it. And I love taking, like, we all got stuff going on in our world. Sometimes it's good stuff. Sometimes it's bad stuff. Sometimes it's boring stuff. But, like, taking that stuff, talking about it with other people whom you respect and you're sort of journeying with together. I haven't known all of the people in my Bible studies exceptionally well, but you get to, if it lasts. And then taking those problems and not just talking about them and beating them about, like, politics or other ideas, but saying, okay, how do we apply the principles of the Bible to these projects or these problems, these issues, these wins that we're having in our life, to either bring ourselves up out of the mud or humble ourselves when we think we're something special. That is really where my faith is. And again, it is a journey for me. I don't know that I do it in a very traditional way, but I get a lot about that faith journey, and certainly it informs decisions, in all aspects of my life, including at Beacon.
Appreciate you sharing that story. I feel like Search Ministries, F3, and a handful of others in the city are just incredible front doors to the faith. And it's
a great
cool
way to
hear,
put it, front doors to the faith.
And I feel like for people that aren't familiar with Search Ministries, and maybe you can speak to it a little bit more intelligently than I can because I've not been terribly involved in it, but it's essentially a wonderful spot for someone who is curious about the faith or thinks they may have a seed of faith, right? And they can go and test that and pound on it and ask questions and challenge the faith. And that's a welcome process.
If you're curious, go to the website, look them up. And it's non-denominational. It's basically the leaders will ask you to get 3 or 4 of your friends together, and hopefully they can bring 2 or 3 friends. So you get people who know each other. It's not 8 strangers, but it's an intimidating thing for me to ask people to be in a Bible study. I don't know why it shouldn't be to disciple like that. You sit around with 8 or 10 fellows, ideally once a week, and walk through life. And Search has been around for 20 odd years, probably 25 years, and it's a non-denominational. Generally, their mind is the business community. There's a lot of real estate people that have participated in it, but reach out to their website or look at their website, see if you like it. Non-denominational, very low pressure, very educational. You'll get you'll get a leader to walk through it with you, but I've truly enjoyed it.
Well, appreciate you sharing that.
F3 is another great one.
Yeah.
There's a website there, go on one of their runs. A lot of times you'll have coffee afterwards and, talk about, where you are in life and why, and maybe what the purpose could be.
That one does require getting up at 5 a.m. and getting a silly nickname, though. Do you have an F3 nickname?
Yeah. Sexy Buddha, which is an odd name for, something that has faith in its title. But Dave Redding named me Sexy Buddha, and I'll stop there.
Oh, that made this whole day worth it. All right, let's do this. So now let's move on. Let's talk about some of the flagship projects.
Ask me no questions. I'll tell you no lies.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got a whole bunch of stuff that we wanted to talk through, but we're going to run out of time here. But Carolina Logistics Park is when I first came from Atlanta to Charlotte and I drove that park, I looked around and I had not seen anything like it nationally. And I've done deals coast to coast. I spent a ton of time in the largest industrial market in the Southeast, and I had never seen anything like it. And it was just unbelievable. And I'm curious that for people that aren't familiar with Charlotte, like imagine the heart of our industrial corridor. They're just sitting there being 200 acres?
Yeah, 240 acres.
Just sitting right smack dab in the heart of the industrial corridor. And no one had ever been able to get their hooks into it. And I'm curious, and I've heard parts of the story, like how did Beacon come up with this slice of land and convince the seller to sell to you instead of everyone else? And what was that story? I mean, I remember Tim Robertson telling me that if you went to meet with him, he'd have a stack of 50 business cards in his front pocket of every other developer he's spoken with. So tell me the story.
This is a long story. I'll try to be brief and you can definitely edit it. But I think in the 2010 plus or minus, the Panthers were looking at putting their practice facility there. So it was just all over the news. And if you look at an aerial, it's the only green spot. It's the only spot without buildings that's that big anywhere. So you look at that and you say, okay, that's why everybody's calling on it. So starting 2011, really Tim Robertson is just his brilliance is like, yeah, it's a green spot. Let's talk to the owner. So he reached out to Mr. Harley, who was being represented by Tom Miller, a real estate broker, and they farmed together. The Miller family farmed with him. And so we drank gallons of coffee and walked next to dozens of cows, hundreds of cows for 8-10 years. And we put offers. I think our offers started at 40 an acre, and I think we closed at 130 odd an acre in 2020. But the way that we got him interested, because he had this accordion folder full of offers, not business cards. And anytime I would negotiate and say, hey, it needs, 70 is ridiculous. All the market comps are at 60. He'd be go, oh, let me just get this one out from Trinity or Prologis and in those situations, I think my maybe my superpower, and I won't give this away, but I will, is I looked at him and he reminded me so much of my grandfather. So being a good grandson, what would I tell my grandfather to do? And looked at it with that principle. And then Tim Robertson, again, he would always say, well, there's one group I'm going to have to go and talk to again. And we couldn't figure out who that was, you know. Is it a REIT? Is it you guys? Is it Children's? Like, it's so frustrating. And Tim, again, looking at a map, who's your key lesson 101 in real estate, who's your neighbor? And he saw that Martin Marietta was our neighbor. And he goes, I bet it's them. Like, who would have been calling on him for this long? And why would he be so dedicated? So it turned out that it was. So we went to Martin Marietta. We had a relationship with them, and said, well, let's just split it. You know, how much do you need for what you're going to do? And they were going to put their crushing machines on that piece of property, modernize them, and use the land under the quarry. So it's like, we can't, if somebody needs the land and they can use it 100 feet deep for mining rights, like, they're always going to pay more than us. We are not going to win. But we agreed to split Mr. Harley's 140 acres. When the Miller family, who owned the land to the south, found out about it, they're like, well, we can't put a neighborhood there. They wanted to sell it for residential. So they're like, we'll just sell you everything from the creek for the same number. And to the creek, McCullough Creek. So that was another 90 acres. So we're like, okay, sweet. We thought we had 140, then we thought we had 70, and we added another 90. So we're about where we started. We're 150 acres or so. Well, then Pineville, in no uncertain terms, with much more colorful language than this, said, you're not going to move your rock crushers onto any more property. We didn't want you to expand. There's a bad relationship between the two. And because of the zoning process in Pineville, they can just say, sue us. And they had won, or just drug it out so long that it didn't matter. So Martin Marietta said, never mind, we can figure it out. And they like, you get the land back. So we went from 140 acres to 60 or 70 acres to 150 plus or minus acres back to 140 plus 90 is around 230. And we added some more land. So I think it's 240 or 60 or something like that total. And it was just listening to the market and what's the best, what would I want to do for my granddad? You know, what's the best for the community? And never in my wildest dreams would I have ever imagined that to be the journey on that deal.
Yeah. Well, and
then we closed all cash in August of 2020. I don't know if you remember August of 2020, but it was in the middle of COVID and nobody had any idea. So we closed all cash on that land investment. I mean, we didn't take it off the table. We kept it on red. And again, we were fortunate because the market and time worked for us. It could have been very, very, very different. You know, if just pretend that 2020 was 2006. I mean, what would have happened on that project?
Right.
So yeah, it always takes a bunch of luck.
Yeah.
That's the story.
And now fast forward, it's what, 2.3 million square feet, 12 buildings. The aggregate of it, if you include the Empire deal that wasn't part of that, and the Lance deal that's not even near the park, but we would call all of that CLP at 4 million square feet. So I guess it's 3.4 million square feet. 3.4 million square feet.
Total.
Okay, got it. If you include Campbell's and all of those. And then
if you take those out, so it's 4 million total.
Okay.
It's right at 3.4.
I see. Okay, and so you guys just had a wonderful liquidity event. Congratulations. We again looked at what our friends at Childress Klein did. And when you think about succession planning and, you know, letting the next generation do what they're going to do, and again, not stepping away entirely, but stepping aside, you know, part of that, you know, in addition to the Beacon Development Company transfer is also we needed to sell some real estate, and that is part of it. It's not typically our fashion to sell that much at once, like you said. Yep. Beacon and Childress Klein never sell. But you know, when there's good reasons to, we did. Well, it's a fantastic project. It's a great story. We've got only a minute or two left, and ultimately, I just wanted to say thank you. Appreciate you coming on here. I know there was a lot. Maybe we got to do this again at some point in time. A lot we didn't get to, but you guys have done some incredible projects in the city. You've had a huge impact on the city. I want to say thank you. Appreciate you coming on.
Well, Bradley, I'm flattered that you would invite me. I think you actually invited Tim Robertson, and he said no, we'll go with J-Mo. So maybe you can get the truth from Tim or Pete Kidwell or Alex one day, you know, on your next podcast. But it's been a real enjoyment. I'm flattered to do this, and thank you for the invitation.
Very much appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to say?
I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Industrial Voices podcast. Appreciate you tuning in. If you enjoyed this podcast, Please subscribe to this show on your preferred platform and consider sharing with a friend. And if I can be of any help to you or your team regarding your real estate, please email me or visit my website, info in the show notes.